Facilitator of the day, Alan Rudnick.
Thank you, Linda, for that introduction, and welcome everyone to this webinar, 4 Keys to a Healthy Church Staff Dynamic. Feel free to connect with me on my website, alanrudnick.org, or on Twitter or on Facebook. It's really my goal today to give you a complete sense of what staff really need, what staff are looking forward to, and what staff from a congregational level need to be able to have in order to be successful. And so today it's really my goal that no matter if you're a pastor or you're a youth director or you're a church musician or if you're on a committee that has to deal with staff or deal with church leadership, or even a congregant, this webinar would be very helpful to you and helpful for your church. So today I'd like to begin to start talking about, what about staff? Why do we have to talk about staff? I serve in a small church. Why am I really interested in this webinar? Or if you serve in a large church, these key principles are important for your church and for your ministry as well. And I'll get into the 4 key concepts for churches to really provide their staff from a congregational level, healthy outlets, healthy tools for them to use, but also for pastors as well as leaders of the organization to embody these practices and these ideas that will help any church and any minister. And then also we'll have question and answer time as well. Feel free to, at the end, check out my book, Work of the Associate Pastor, which is helpful for youth directors, church musicians, any staff position that is featured, whether paid or unpaid. And you can check that out at judsonpress.com. Well, as we start to look at this key component of church staff, you may say, well, I just am a pastor of a part-time and there's just me and the custodian. Or you may say, well, I pastor a small church and there's really a part-time office person and a part-time choir director and they're not really paid. Or you may be a pastor at a medium-sized church or staff in a medium-sized church where there might be a full-time youth position or music position, or you may have children's positions, full-time office positions, or you may be on a large church staff where there's several office staff and program directors. But no matter what type of staff dynamic or configuration is made up of in your church, these key ideas will work, because as I will talk about in a few minutes here, even if you have volunteers in a ministry area, leading a ministry area, they are volunteer staff, and they need to be included in this concept of a healthy staff dynamic. So volunteer staff, you certainly have people in your churches and our churches who aren't really considered staff, but they should be considered staff. And you may say, well, Susan, she's been doing this job forever. She just volunteers out of her free time and volunteers out of the goodness of her heart. But you know what? Susan needs a job description, and she needs to be treated as volunteer staff. And we'll talk about in a few moments here why that's important. Or you may have paid staff where there's higher expectations. Possibly you have staff at your church who may fulfill part-time or full-time positions. As I mentioned, youth, children, staff, music staff, small group staff. So no matter if they are paid or unpaid positions, all these positions need to be treated equally in terms of they are staff, whether they're paid or unpaid. And there's a set of expectations and a set of goals that go with that as well. And also, as I'll address later on in the presentation, there should be some type of pastor-staff relations team or committee that is overseeing these volunteer and paid staff, because that really helps the congregation be able to effectively manage and lead their staff in such a way where there's a group of people who are really trained and really equipped to assist the staff and assist those who are leading ministry positions in such a way that they can meet the vision and the mission of the church. So the number one key, or the first key here for healthy church staff dynamics, is facilitating effective communication. And what this is about is communication that's verbal, that's print, that's online, because often churches are frustrated with communication, that messages are unclear. And so many churches, most churches, probably are connected online. And technology is a wonderful way for staff to connect. In our increasingly mobile world and social media, we are more connected in more ways than ever. And before the time of cell phones or websites, church staff connected over the phone or face-to-face. And with technology, it should definitely be utilized because there's some benefits here. Obviously, email is fast and convenient. You can get a lot of input very quickly, get people speaking about ideas online. Facebook, your church or your staff may have a closed group or an open group to share ideas. Church staff certainly use texting. It's quick. I've even used it in service when I've noticed that something is missing or something should be coming up, and I quickly text a staff member as a reminder or a question. And certainly Skype. You know, if someone's at a conference or someone's away for some type of development or seminar and there needs to be a quick face-to-face meeting, Skype is a great free way. And then Google Docs are really helpful. At my church, we utilize this a lot with spreadsheets and documents shared over the staff in such a way that at any time people can input or see what's coming up on the planning calendar or different documents of information of groups of people we need to contact. But there's also drawbacks of technology. You know, one of the most frustrating things as a pastor, a staff person, or even just a human is getting that long, drawn-out email that's 5 pages long that says, well, here's everything that went wrong with this event. And we've been a part of those email chains, perhaps one-on-one or with other people, and it's really not effective to just give this long, one-way soliloquy of, here's what I have a problem with. Email, as another drawback, can be passive-aggressive. People can really say things that they wouldn't necessarily say face-to-face and that they probably would regret. And as I tell my staff and tell other people in ministry, before you push send on this, would you want your mother reading this? Or would you want your best friend reading this? And it gives a kind of check to say, is this something that you should really be sending? Because you're probably very emotional right now or you're very upset, and perhaps addressing the issue later would be helpful. But also with technology and messages and text, there's a lack of nonverbal, and people really rely on nonverbal. And studies have indicated that up to somewhere up to 80% of communication is nonverbal. And so the question is, with being someone on a church staff, a pastor, or volunteer staff, is this comment or what I have to communicate, is it really that important to do over email? But should it really be done face-to-face? Because when you have a sit-down conversation with people, they see your facial expressions, they pick up on intonation, and that is often helpful because someone could read a message online or an email and take it in a completely different way in the wrong context. So I always encourage staff and people in ministry to use email for informing people, confirming, hey, we're going to have this meeting, or affirming, hey, nice job on that sermon, or a great youth retreat last weekend. Another part of effective communication is how we use meetings. Even church staff meetings, no matter if you just have 3 people on staff, or you have a large staff, or you're a pastor, or you're a ministry leader and you're leading a meeting of a committee, really, a lot of people don't like church meetings. And some people may just sit there, like in this cartoon here, where someone's presenting something and everyone's going to give non-comprehending nods of approval. People check out of church meetings. They're notorious for being long and drawn out. So I really encourage people to use meetings in this way. Of course, first, be on time. Be on time to the meeting. Your presence as the staff leader or the person leading the meeting is pretty important. Make sure you take notes, because there's things talked about or there are things agreed on that you need to make sure you need to follow up on, or possibly other people. Really, you need to stick to the agenda, and don't let people go down rabbit holes of, remember when Bob used to do this? Oh yeah, I remember that, or I remember that vacation Bible school, and all of a sudden you just wasted 15 minutes of time going down memory lane. And when possible, use technology in such a way where is there a way to give a report or share some information that you can put it up on the screen or have people interact with it. And also encourage people to speak up. Church meetings are notorious for some people just sitting there silent. So encourage people to speak up and share their opinion, but make sure you encourage them to do it respectfully. And don't allow people to dominate the meeting. There's always that one person who may be really assertive or aggressive or a really passionate person. Make sure you ask other people who are quiet, what do you think of that? Or what do you think about these comments? And make sure you're also being a spiritual guide. Start out with a devotion, or if things get really heated, make sure you bring a meeting back to a place of center that we're really here to do something in the name of Jesus Christ, and not really get too muddled in negativity or blame, or having the meeting just go off the rails. I always like to encourage staff to think about these 5 rules of conflict, because it's inevitable. You're going to have conflict on staff, whether it's between the pastor and the secretary, or between the music leader and the youth leader, or between other people in your organization. The first rule is it's going to happen, and you have to accept it, that conflict is not a dirty word. It's not a bad thing. Number 2, it doesn't have to be ugly. It doesn't have to be nasty, and we'll talk a little bit later about some effective tools of how to address conflict. And always remember that the resolution starts with you. And if you feel that you've been wronged and something needs to happen, you're on your own power to try to make it right. And when you're dealing with conflict, try to minimize technology as possible. Make it face-to-face between staff people or ministry leaders. And when all else fails, that you've exhausted all those options, then and only then bring on a third party. So some other great ways to use technology for communication. Slide reply is a good ministry, or it's a good meeting sign up, but I've seen it used well for ministry in such a way that slide reply can be used for sign-ups and coordinating who's going to do what or who's going to bring what to a meeting. Doodle.com is a great meeting scan. If you have 3 dates for a meeting, you can send out a doodle. It's a free tool online. Dropbox, file storage, Google.com. There's free apps and different documents, and you can share files as well. And Trello.com is great to use if you're going to organize a project and you need a timeline, and people have to have input as well. So check out those tools, see if they're helpful for you. In addition to thinking and talking about this idea of effective communication, part of communication is also cultivating community. And the cultivation of community among staff is critically important, because in ministry, burnout is it's an extreme problem in churches. There's high expectations, low pay. And even the New York Times did an article back in 2010 about even clergy and ministry leaders, that they started talking about how members of clergy now suffer from obesity, hypertension, depression at rates higher than most Americans. And I would include church staff members in that. In the last decade, their use of antidepressants has risen, with their life expectancy has fallen. Many would change jobs if they could. And that's really kind of a depressing take on the state of clergy or ministry leaders. And so churches have to really work hard, and staff have to really work hard against burnout. And so if you notice this in yourself, or you notice this in other staff members, that you're seeing an unprecedented amount of anger or just a loss or interest in ministry anymore, you begin to feel withdrawn, weight loss or gain, appearance changes in other staff people, or even people are just acting not like themselves. That's really the time for pastors and ministry leaders and pastor-staff relations committee to come alongside that staff person, that pastor, and to ask them what's going on, to meet with them, to sit down with them, and to establish confidentiality, to really come alongside that staff person in such a way where they can begin to address these issues. And maybe there's some resources outside the congregation, some clergy coaches or some church coaches that can work with this individual, work with the church to begin to change the environment in which staff people don't become burned out. Oftentimes, I found this several years ago, oftentimes in churches we often suffer from recreational complaint syndrome, which this is a big long phrase for gossiping, and this is based off of the work of a husband and wife team, co-directors of the Conflict Research Consortium, Burgess and Burgess. It's the common practice of gossiping with one's friends or allies, I would say in the church or on church staff, about how one's opponents are the source of all evil, and while one's own group, of course, is the source of all virtue. The ability of many radio talk shows to exploit this phenomenon undergirds both their success and highly inaccurate images of the world that they often give their listeners. And I think this applied to the secular world is certainly true, but mainly to our churches. You know, we often suffer from, you know, we Christians feel like we have to be nice, and so rather than say something constructive to someone, we'd rather recreationally complain, trying to pit groups against groups, and really as a sense to cultivate community. This is extremely, extremely troublesome. And that's why a pastor-staff relations committee can really help with this type of a problem in churches. Because what tends to happen, using Murray Bowen's family systems theory, is that triangles often form. And a triangle, Bowen theorized, is when a two-person system, so there's a problem between person A and person B, they're called a dyad, is stressed and develops anxiety. You know, in churches we see this all the time, whether it be between a pastor and a congregant, or the youth leader and a parent, and there's a conflict between two people. And so there's a tendency that we want to alleviate our anxiety, so we draw on a third person. And so even though there's a conflict between person A and person B draws in person C and tries to ally them against person A. And triangles, when you start to realize they're happening, it's important to put down boundaries, and to put down the boundary to say, you know, we really need to solve this between us and not someone else. And so cultivating community, communities that are really successful in church staff see this coming a mile away and put down a boundary. In cultivating community, we really start to see what I call marks of a healthy community. Congregational health starts at the top with the pastor or senior leader of the congregation. And as I talked about, boundaries are really important. If someone feels that a boundary is being offended, or it's getting too personal, or someone went past the boundary of respect, obviously there needs to be some accountability. But also among church staff, there needs to be honesty, and there needs to be a fostered connection of active listening and trust. And lastly, I think this is really important, this has to do with family systems, is in the family systems theory, being a non-anxious presence. When anxiety rises or when conflict arises, this is a type of attitude that isn't easily swayed, isn't easily turned or excited or extremely worried, but they maintain a level of understanding that things can be done to change the situation, but there are some things out of one's control, and that having a confidence that some type of solution can be worked out. So these are some important marks of a church staff as well as a congregation as well. So we ask how really can church staffs create community, this sense of shared identity and commonness? Well, you have to start to ask, do your church staff, no matter if it's just a few people on staff or if it's a large church staff, do they have a physical space for community? Are they encouraged to meet in a conference room or hospitality space? Do they have their own meeting space? Do they have a place where they can gather and have discussions? Do your staff spend time outside ministry, outside the church? Did they go out to lunches? Do they do staff building exercises? Are they on a kickball team or a volleyball team or whatever? Does your church have a budget for staff development? Are all the church staff, the pastors and the paid and unpaid folks who help run the church, do they have resources available for them to go to seminars and conferences? And does your church staff take a retreat together? And one of the many ways to do that is to use outside retreat centers or leaders or people who are versed in this. A lot of denominations and judicatory religious organizations will have conferences that can help church staff as well. And what's really interesting about talking about a church staff is the president of Pixar, Ed Catmull, once said that the mark of a vibrant community is where talented people are loyal to one another and their collective work. Everyone feels that they are part of something extraordinary, and their passion and their accomplishments make the community a magnet for talented people coming out of schools or working at other places. That's really what people want to be a part of. They want to be part of a vibrant community. And of course, we know all the Pixar movies and films, and people in the film industry, they would love to get a job at Pixar. And wouldn't that be wonderful if your church was the type of vibrant community where people were just asking and wishing and wanting to be a part of your ministry team? So creating community and cultivating community, again, starts at the top, and the top leader, the pastor, needs to spend time with staff. Even in a small staff, if you have a part-time secretary or a volunteer choir director, or you're a large staff, they need to spend time more than just at a staff meeting. But there needs to be time when there are lunches and dinners or breakfasts or around coffee, just to spend some time to check in and just for there to form some relationships, some synergy, some trust. And even in large church staffs, it can be a challenge for a senior minister or myself as an executive minister to spend time with all the employees, but sometimes that needs to be done in tandem with one or two other people. And really, people really respond well to thank you. It's amazing how the power of just saying thank you for small things really make the staff feel that their work is appreciated and that people are paying attention. And make sure that church staff are giving credit where credit's due. That's really important, that someone doesn't try to take credit for something they didn't do or an idea. And so it really requires people to be cognizant of giving folks credit. And also encouraging staff to take on a project instead of just one person taking on Vacation Bible School or a retreat. Try to encourage staff to do it together, because maybe they have some ideas, even if it's not part of their ministry area. Maybe just going to someone and asking for their thoughts or getting some feedback will help create some new ideas. The third key for effective, healthy staff dynamics is establishing but also maintaining the staff relations team. Now, you may be a church staff person or a secretary or someone, we might be a pastor, and you say, well, we got one. That's great, but are they actively sharpening their tools for their team? Or maybe you're in a church where it's a smaller church and you don't have one. Well, you need to have one, because when we start to look at employees and how employee morale affects people, based on this one study, the top probably most impactful thing that impacts morale negatively is when there's a lack of open and honest communication. You know, people feel like there's discussions and things happening behind closed doors. And second is no one likes to be micromanaged. No one likes to be micromanaged in such a way where they feel like they can't use their gifts and their talents. But also third here, failure to recognize employee achievements. There's nothing worse than working really hard at something and it goes well and you're not really recognized for that. But also there's some remedies for low morale among employees, and this was done with the organization Account Temps. The best remedies is for low morale for employees, and I would say this goes for churches as well, is communication. If there's low morale, begin to have discussions about what's going well, what's not going well, how can the leaders of the church support the staff and support the ministry leaders. And also rewarding exceptional performance. You know, that's just something that's not done often in churches. We may feel like that's too secular, but just a thank you note with a gift card for doing something well done can be extremely welcomed for staff people. And of course, above all, raises always help. Raises always help boost morale. Also recognition, you know, even just having a plaque of 5 years of ministry, 10 ministry, or exceptional leadership in the church for a pastor or for a youth director or children's director or one of the ministry leaders. So these things can really help boost health on the staff and morale as well. Now, for those of you who don't know what a Staff Relations Committee is or what it does or what it's supposed to look like, ideally, it's really 3 to 5 people, and anything beyond that, it becomes unmanageable to begin to lead staff and evaluate staff. You start getting to 6 or 7 or 8 people, and there's a lot of opinions, there's a lot of back and forth, and it's really hard to have a group that can focus on the task at hand. And also, this is kind of a specialized role for church members because they're acting as advocates for the staff and for the pastors. Really, you know, in a lot of organizations they have human resources, and it's said, well, human resources isn't really there, it's just to protect management or something like that. But Staff Relations Committee should really be there for the staff and be an advocate for the staff. And there to be communication. So there's clear expectations and job descriptions, which we'll go into in a minute, that they should really be encouraging with notes and thank yous, and they're really tasked with monitoring performance and goals. Whoever's setting the goals, whether it's a supervisor or a pastor, that supervisor or pastor needs to be working with the committee to evaluate their performance, because if they're doing really well, you want to keep that person. Well, you want to keep paying them what they're worth, or else they'll go to some other church or some other organization where they'll get better benefits or pay. And as we'll talk about in a few moments, one of the most important things employees need is a path to success, and a Pastor-Staff Relations Committee can do that as well. Well, a lot of people have some misconceptions. Well, you know, the Staff Relations Committee is just really there to protect the pastor. Well, the Staff Relations Committee is not to be a complaint team. That's all they're there to do, is just to shield complaints, although there may be complaints that shouldn't be the primary goal of the team, but it should be a proactive approach as well. And it's not always going to be the conflict resolution team of any situation in the church. You know, some things could just be handled by the pastor and a staff person and a congregant, but oftentimes there will be situations where they do need to intervene, and if the conflict is serious enough, they need to navigate that process. And this committee is not the pastor's enforcers, where the pastor has to make sure that something is going to get done, and this committee is going to talk to all the people who are resisting, and they're going to enforce the pastor's will. That's not really what these committees are for. And they're not independent of other leaders. The Staff Relations Committee often makes recommendations to finance or a church leadership board about what they would like to see in compensation or for goals, and they should really work in concert with the other lay leaders of the church. And oftentimes people think, well, we'll just put some business people on the staff relations committee, because business people know how to handle these types of things. Well, just because someone's a business person doesn't make them a great leader or a great manager of people. There's plenty of business people out there who are very successful but treat people poorly. So you need to find people in the church who have a spiritual sensitivity, but also maybe have some experience, successful experience, managing employees. That's helpful. But someone who has a passion for people and really wants to see the church succeed. So some helpful tips here, and this is from the Ministers and Missionary Benefit Board, MMBB, and you can check out their website for more helpful information. They really need to be someone who exhibits some type of Christian character of love and faith and grace and forgiveness, but also wants to see the church succeed. And they really demonstrate a commitment to the church, and they're able to really communicate in such a way that they convey on behalf of the staff or behalf of the congregation helpful communication. And these have to be people you got to trust, and so they got to handle confidential material about pay and performance and things like that, and conflict that the church doesn't need to know every little thing about the staff, minor details, but they need to be able to be connectors who can establish trust between the congregation and the staff. And also, it would really be helpful if they can be the type of people who can reconcile and navigate conflict as well. And part of the work of the committee is to do things like establish benefits for church staff, make sure the church staff have an opportunity for development, make sure that they know about conferences and retreats in the area, but also make sure that there's a budget for that for the church staff. And it's not just $100. It needs to really be a robust line item in a church to help staff continue to learn and sharpen their skills. And probably one of the most important things is to establish a staff handbook. Churches are notorious for not having staff handbooks, and you don't have to reinvent the wheel here. Ask other churches in your town, or ask your region staff or national office if they have examples, and ask them if it's okay to boilerplate it and copy it and customize it to your church's needs. But that's really important for the committee to do that, and to not let it sit in time. One of the things that happens over time is change, and these policy manuals for staff, they need to be updated every year because there are different arrangements that change, and staff may need to change the way they do things. And also, this committee keeps the accountability of the staff. If there are people that are really underperforming, they need to be held accountable for that as well. And so this committee, it's really important that as staff, if you're a staff person, you don't have this, I would highly recommend to go to your pastor or go to your leadership lay committee and really advocate for this and talk about the need for it, because these committees need to be meeting continually, and not just when there's problems, but they need to be meeting with the pastor and meeting with the staff at least on a quarterly basis to say, how's it going? How can we help you? And churches who are in these committees, they need to be trained, and they need to ask other churches who are doing this well how other churches do it and function. And there's some really great tools on YouTube. If you just search on YouTube, Pastor Staff Relation Committee, there's some great training tools that are available through other denominations. The American Baptist, MMBB.org has a section on pastor staff committees, as well as ministerscouncil.com. And other denominations have resources that are really helpful. So the last kind of area here for a healthy staff is that the staff feels empowered to succeed, that they feel like they have an opening, they have a wedge, they have a venue, that they can go through their goals in such a way where they feel like they're not set up for failure, but they're set up for success. And a lot of times people leave their jobs, even the secular world. In this study, number one, the boss is just a jerk. Whoever the supervisor is. And in church settings, I'm sure there's a lot of supervisors, pastors who are just bad at managing people, and that needs to be corrected. And so top reason why is people leave because they have a really unsatisfactory supervisor. Second reason they leave is lack of empowerment. They don't feel like they're given the tools or they're given the ability to solve problems and influence decisions. They don't feel part of the process. And in churches, the staff need to feel like they're supported in such a way where they can move forward. Just like businesses, churches have internal politics as well. All the little politicking and ins and outs of relationships and who has power and who doesn't. Staff really get worn down by that. And number four, when people aren't recognized for a job well done, as I mentioned previously, either through compensation or for recognition or rewards, it's really important that employees are rewarded. And the fifth reason here in this study, the company is going under, and certainly the people in churches and church staff sense that when either the leadership or the church is heading in a direction where there isn't a clear vision for success or a clear vision of what the church wants to achieve, people will jump ship, and they feel like the church or the staff is unhealthy. They're going to go elsewhere. And really, in order to help an employee succeed on a staff and have a sense of health, every employee needs to be evaluated. Whether you're volunteer, part-time, full-time, whether you're the pastor or the janitor, you need to be evaluated, and you need to do the pastor-staff relations committee. But everyone fears evaluations because no one wants to get negative feedback. But we have to turn these evaluations and flip them over in such a way where they're feedback for success, not feedback for negativity. Because a lot of times people, even when they get feedback and even when they feel like, okay, I got some things to work on, and they come up for their next evaluation, they feel like they haven't succeeded. And that's a lot of times because their goals were not these 5 things. They weren't achievable, they weren't measurable, they weren't realistic, they weren't checked in on, and they weren't refined. You know, every evaluation should have 1 or 2 or maybe 3 top goals. And whether you do evaluations quarterly or twice a year, you shouldn't wait a year. There should be no surprises at evaluations time. Because you need to make them measurable in such a way to say, you know, you will establish 3 new small groups instead of just saying establishing a small group ministry. It's too vague. But it needs to be realistic. You know, establishing a small group ministry of 10 new groups in a church of 20. That's unrealistic, possibly. But also there needs to be check-in. You know, how is this goal going? Is this goal on target? Is this unrealistic? Because maybe the supervisor and the employee, or the committee and the employee, need to refine it a bit more. And as I mentioned before, empowering, praise, and thanks really help people succeed because they need the freedom. They need a degree of opportunity. They need to have the opportunity for failure. And we don't like failure, but failure is helpful to know because you know what doesn't work, and that's just as helpful as what does work in a church. And so people need the opportunity to fail and learn and self-discover that, you know, this didn't work. Now, you don't want a track record of failure, but you want to see some attempt on the employee's part that they're trying, and they're trying their best. And some of that feedback is also talking about what didn't work from a perspective of learning, not from a perspective of accusing people or coming down on people. And the senior leader, the pastor, the staff people, they need to be listening as well. And perhaps this even comes from asking people about a sermon that a pastor preaches and talking to the staff. What did you think about the sermon? You know, where could I have improved? What worked well for you? What didn't? That makes staff people feel like they feel connected to the pastor and feel like they have input. But also another way to empower is to get your staff people up front, get them in the pulpit, get them speaking, get them leading. You know, whether you're recognizing or just saying thank you to them in front of the congregation, maybe they have gifts for preaching. Maybe they have gifts in other ways where you can get them in front of the congregation and to really celebrate their gifts. And also senior leaders and committees asking employees, well, what can they do for you? What can they do for the employee to help them achieve success? And I also talk about in my book, Work of the Associate Pastor, staff people need a means of coping, whether that's the staff relations committee or another group or a person in the church where when they're really struggling or they need support through their ministry, that they have someone to go to. And also empowering people is, maybe you don't have a big recognition ceremony, but you just give them a shout out from a sermon or from the pulpit, from the committee, thanking them. That really helps people feel like they can succeed when they feel like someone's cheerleading them. Now, one of the most difficult ways to succeed in the church is, we have this idea of the democratic way to do things, of let's form a committee. Let's form a committee around this person and let's democratize this process. And actually, when you read the New Testament, there's very little democracy going on. The New Testament talks more about the work of the Spirit and the collective wisdom of others. And I really think that for staff people, they need to feel like they have a team around them and not necessarily a pass-through committee. But there should be some sort of group that comes around each staff person, whether it's a youth leader or a music director or the pastor, him or herself, that has a group that can support and help be the legs and the arms and the hands and feet of Christ. So often, there's a group of people in the church that get an idea. Maybe it's the youth group and the youth minister gets an idea and they want to do something for the community. So they're told, well, you got to run that through the mission committee, and you got to get the mission committee on board. Well, they don't meet till next month, and there's something happening in the community that really needs some action. Well, what if a team was formed around one project that they, with the mission committee, to say, we really want to do this, and we want you to work with us, but we want to do this. You can help as you feel fit, but this is a one-time thing, and we want to see how it goes. And so a team approach around an idea or a project can really help staff get their ideas into action, and they really can experiment with some ideas, whether it's with children or youth or adults or groups. They can really have a group that can carry out some ideas and get other people involved in ministry. One thing that can really hinder success is certain personalities on staff, the lone wolf. Somebody on staff who's just out there on their own and they don't really collaborate. And so one way to kind of counter that is to invite them into something, a conversation, an idea, or a project. Or you might have the over-functioner, or someone who does everything. Well, asking them to let go and share the load. And then there's certainly people on staff and even in churches that are idea killers. They shoot down ideas before they're even attempted. And so one way to say is, well, we won't have to make this set in stone, but let's try it. Let's see what happens. And certainly on staffs, there can be a last-minute person where everything is chaos and things aren't planned well. And that's really takes the pastor-staff relations committee and the pastor or whoever the supervisor is to come alongside that person to help them how to plan and form an agenda, form a plan for an event. Well, a lot of times when you're trying to succeed, you get stuck. This poor turtle here, how is he ever going to get on his feet again? Well, whenever you get stuck with ideas of ministry, look to other nonprofits. There's other groups, the Salvation Army or the Red Cross, they just had a really great social media campaign. Maybe you can model that for your church, or they attempted to do something, or look to other businesses, see what they're doing. Are they making their website in a certain way? Are they trying certain promotions? The churches can embody these types of things or even work with them to try to raise awareness around a project. And also think about getting outside the problem. Let the challenge sit there, go outside, take a walk, come back, go to a coffee shop, get out a pad, start sketching out some ideas. We really need to get some new ideas around when people get stuck on a problem or a situation or a dynamic. And of course, always ask for help. Don't feel like that you just have to be out there on your own. Well, I hope in this webinar you've been able to get some really effective concepts and tools of some effective, healthy staff dynamics. And we kind of talked about no matter if you're a small church or part-time pastor or you have some non-paid staff or volunteer staff, you can really put these concepts together to really have some effective communication between staff using technology, but also knowing when to use face-to-face communication. And also cultivating community on staff, thinking those ways of getting staff working together, no matter if you have 3 people who are on staff at your church or you have 30, getting them outside the walls of the church and really thinking about healthy ways for them to interact and also addressing conflict. Third, we talked about forming or sustaining a really good pastor-staff relations committee, and I gave you some tools, some outlets of some training resources that you can look to for that, because they are a really important group that will really help sustain staff through their ministry. And last week we talked about empowered to succeed, of some stumbling blocks, but also some ways to help staff succeed and for you to succeed in what you're try to do as a staff person. And so I hope this has been a helpful time, and I'd love for you to connect to my website, alanrudnick.org. I blog about leadership, write on issues of church and faith and things that are challenging for us as staff. Also, please check out my book, buy a copy, The Work of the Associate Pastor, even if you're not an associate pastor, but if you're a youth minister, or if you're a children's minister or a staff person, it would really, really be helpful for you, and you can get that at judsonpress.com. Well, again, I thank you for your time, and want to open this time to any questions for anyone out there.
Thank you, Alan. That was very, very informative, and you gave lots of great practical information. And now, if any of the attendees would like to ask Alan a question, you could either raise your hand using the control panel, type in a question using the chat box or the question box, any of the tools available within your control panel. Okay. Alan, I don't see any questions coming through. So at this time, I'd like to thank Alan so much for his presentation, and thank all of you for attending. I encourage you to learn more about the work of the Associate Pastor. As he mentioned, you can find it at judsonpress.com, and you can receive a 20% discount. I also invite you to join us for upcoming webinars scheduled for later this month and next month. You can get details by clicking on the News and Notes section in the right-hand corner of our website. And I will also include a link in the follow-up email that you will receive containing the presentation and a link to the webinar. So again, Alan, thank you so much, and everyone enjoy the rest of your day.